Hello, hi, and welcome back. Well, thanks very much, firstly, to the presenters for the work and time they put into producing the presentations and providing us with so much useful and interesting information. I just remind the audience, if they'd like to pose any questions, please do feel free to do that. Put them in the Q&A, and we'll address those. I just wanted to start off asking Holly and Youba a little bit about terminology, and you touched on this, Holly, in your penultimate slide, I think it was. Um, the Convention on Biological Diversity talks about ecosystems-based approaches. The UNFCCC uses ecosystem-based adaptation. The IUCN talks about nature-based solutions, and here we are, we're talking about nature-based approaches. Do you think that kind of solutions framing is problematic? Or perhaps even dangerous, in as much as it, using the term solutions, encourages people to think that nature has all the answers, that a bit of afforestation will be sufficient, for example.
I guess the language of solutions brings up the question, solution to which issue? So is it climate change? Is it food security? Is it biodiversity loss? So in some way, I kind of like that it poses that question because it helps us think about, solving many problems with one approach, right? Um, but obviously, I think a lot of times people embark on these projects not necessarily for climate change first, but climate co-benefits as kind of an add-on to some other thing that might be the core problem, which often might be about livelihoods and development. And so I think that some of this, different groups will try to pull in money for a project by framing it as climate change, when maybe they should be centering development because that might be more important. And if too many of these projects get pitched as like climate solutions, then there might be disappointment if they're not delivering all of the climate benefits. So I think that when we think about these terms, we have to consider all of these different aspects.
If I may, I think that there is small nuances based on which community you are part of, that they are all addressing more or less same thing. And there is some temptation to say that because you have a problem and then you need to solve the problem. It's rather a kind of responses to the problem you are facing rather than you solve the problem. Solving the problem, that means, you implement it, it's solved, it's over. But the kind of problem we are facing, the kind of issue we are dealing with, and then we provide responses because we cannot solve the problem because it will take long time and during effort, partials in order to solve it definitely. We are in a turning point, being a biodiversity, being in soil degradation, desertification, or climate change, the best responses we can provide. And then some will say it nature-based approach or nature-based solution, and some will say ecosystem services and so on and so forth. It depends on the community you are a part of.
Thank you very much. Responses and nature-based responses, another set of terms we could use. But the complexity of the range of challenges we face is enormous. Holly, you mentioned in your presentation safeguards that need to be developed and clarified around nature-based approaches, in particular balancing CDR with biodiversity and other environmental goals. Could you give some examples about how perhaps this could be best done in the near term, particularly given the need for rapid deployment of these CDR efforts that have been planned and promised day to day? We see new ones coming through that we should do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, I mean, there's already been a lot of development in this area. Natalie's group at Oxford has worked with different NGOs to put forth these standards. I think that these multi-stakeholder approaches to developing them are good. We also have, for example, with biofuels, there have been different standards with carbon offsets, there's been standards and certifications, and we could talk about the merits of each one. I personally, I think more robust ones have more participation from a broader range of actors. But I think the main point I would make is that there's already been a lot of work done in this space. So it's more about implementing that and taking it forward, in my view.
Okay. And Youba, did you have any reflections?
No, I think that as it has been indicated by Holly and as well by Natalie, the community engagement, the community participation, because that will happen in an area that is maybe there will be some community that are involved in their they have their livelihood in the area, and then they need to be involved in all kind of decisions that need to be taken in order to bring that kind of approach. One cannot ignore them, and then it will not be at the sake of their livelihood, and then they should be part of decision-making process.
And I would just add that part of this work isn't just creating these safeguards or standards, it's funding dedicated research in communities over a period of time to look at how those are working or not, and then adjusting, which is something that takes a lot of expertise, a lot of time, but is really integral because sometimes there's been empirical research how these standards can become just kind of tick box exercises and aren't truly being implemented on the ground. So I would encourage people to think about developing these as a very long process, not just kind of a one-off effort.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And even trying to get that research working that reaches out across communities, institutions, countries even is so challenging. I'm going to go to questions from the audience. The first one, would the combination of nature-based solutions, NBS, with grey infrastructure as solutions produce synergies, trade-offs, or contradictions?
What the question exactly?
So the question is posed was, would the combination of NBS with grey infrastructure as solutions produce synergies, trade-offs, or contradictions? It might be helpful if the questioner would like to say a little bit more about what they mean about grey infrastructure, perhaps, and we could come back to that question. Would that be helpful to you as participants?
I mean, my read of that would guess maybe about kind of seawalls is the first thing I think of when I think about gray infrastructure, as opposed to like a blue carbon coastal restoration approach. And so I guess that the short answer is yes, it can produce synergies and trade-offs and contradictions, but it's hard to talk about those without a specific case in mind. And some colleagues of I and I published a paper on adaptation and carbon removal in One Earth that looks at some of the potential synergies and trade-offs there. So there's literature out there about starting about it.
That's fine. We can catch up later on holiday, and perhaps you could share some references with me and we can put those on the site. That'll be super. So I'm going to move on to another question that we have now, which is the discussion presumes that the nations will pony up the enormous quantity of money required for at-scale CDR, but isn't this unrealistic? Indeed, increasingly unrealistic. We are, after all, entering an era of increasing climate dislocation, including competition for scarce national funding required to respond to climate exacerbated disasters, not to mention the upfront costs of rapid and full decarbonisation. So the heart of that question is the scaling up realistic or not?
I think it will depend how you frame the issue, because if you look at for 30 years of climate policies, and then it was a silos approach, we adopted. First of all, mitigation, and then we're bringing adaptation. And then now we are bringing other elements because we have not mitigated as we needed. Where we are actually is to put on the table all the options for responses, because we need to deal with, if we want to achieve the Paris Agreement, the 2-degree targets. And then things we expected to do on mitigation, if we have started 30 years ago, will be able and then to continue in the same trend. And then the need and the scope of adaptation will not be as it is currently. And this is why it's important and then to bring some other element, such as what we call the nature-based solution. It's not new. It is not something completely new. It's something we know very well. And then there is a lot of experiences. And then the problem is that to put everything on the table, as it has been indicated in the introductory remark of Natalie, part can be done with the nature-based solution. And this also is in line with the IPCC land report. Land can do part of the problem, but it cannot do all. She indicated 30%, those are some estimate, and 70% should come from. And then one have to look at all those in a holistic manner, rather than focusing to say that that will be a massive resources that we use. What resources will exist? What will be the best option, the best solution for which of the different options we have in on the table? And then we do not have also to exclude the adaptation, the need for adaptation. All those has to go hand in hand, and then to play on the whole set of options we have, rather than having a narrow view and then to say that that will need a massive resource.
Thank you. Holly, did you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about the costs of CDR. So, I mean, there's some near-term actions that are pretty inexpensive. You can see Bronson Griscom et al.'s paper about the costs of different types of solutions. And I can link to that if you haven't seen it. So then you have some of these kind of forest-based actions that could be as inexpensive as $10 a ton. You know, some of these things would also come with economic co-benefits, so that there's that kind of low-hanging fruit, but that's not going to get you to like gigatons level scales. So I don't think people are really presuming that we're going to see, you know, several tens of gigatons removals. I think very few people would think that. So there's a difference between the costs of, say, removing 1 gigaton or 1 billion tons and removing 10. And if we're aiming more towards that kind of 1 or 2 level, like if we really decarbonize quite a bit and then have these kind of leftover hard to abate emissions from aviation or agriculture industry that are 1 or 2 gigatons, I think that that's really quite reasonable. I mean, if you just, you know, do the math on your head, assume that, you know, you can do some of this for, say, between $100 and $200 a ton, and then compare that to the costs of, you could, like the climate disasters that the questioner mentioned, you know, a bad wildfire season, maybe $50 billion, a bad hurricane season, 100 billion, 200 billion, and then you compare that to the costs of the carbon removals and compare it to the costs of something like the US defense budget or the costs of the response to the coronavirus. I mean, if you look at these scales, the costs of at scale CDR actually look pretty doable compared to some of the things that A, we currently spend money on, and B, are going to commit ourselves to spending money on if we keep on this path of climate change. So hopefully that was coherent enough.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But those costs, of course, at let's say $100 a ton, are the short-term costs, and in the longer term, we have to deal with the long-term maintenance of the storage and the sequestration for hundreds of years, and the governance of that. So the cost is short-term, but very long-term as well, and that shouldn't probably be forgotten about. Whereas the cost of some other things may be very large in the short term, but not so large in the longer term. Anyway, it's good to move on to another question, and that is, how can we go from the paradigm of kind of sowing the seeds of this conversation of the governance debate through to a situation where we're managing a situation of good governance? How can we actually start the journey along this track towards good governance, whatever good governance might mean in the future? I think I'm going to ask Youba to answer. Sorry.
Okay. No, the point here again, I think that there is some specificity on each of the response options, being on deep mitigation, being on nature-based solutions or responses, because there's some specificity, but we need to bring that in a global governance system in order, because there is trade-offs, there is synergies, and then we need to make an emphasis on the synergy that exists. And then to look at, and then some also are local, because there is a local aspect, particularly in nature-based solution. And then to look at those, some are global, and then we are dealing with a global commons, and then we cannot avoid that. And then to put that in that context. And some also related to the financial aspect. And then it's a bit complex, it's a bit tricky, but all aspects need to be look at it, and then to see what is specific, and then what's related to the global, and to find ways of aligning them. And there will be a huge component on capacity issue, capacity building issue, because if we are dealing with the local and then the natural-based solution, involvement of local community, local people is very important at country level. In the case of mitigation, this does not matter, but that need some capacity element, that need also some governance issue at the local level. And then one have to look at and then to see how to better address it.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to move on to a different topic now. I wonder if you can just say or talk a little bit about what you see the key differences are of scaling up NBS in different scenarios in different contexts. So, for example, scaling up NBS in Ghana, the process, the discussions, the governance, the local engagement processes are likely to be very different to what might happen in Germany, for example. So I wonder if you can reflect on that and what it might mean for international conversations, international negotiations, that these very different worlds exist.
You want me to come in again?
Yes, God.
Okay. The point here again is that based on the different elements that has been particularly outlined by Holly in her presentation on the 6 different issues that need to be looked at carefully. On the safeguard, the capturing co-benefit, the permanence leakages, monitoring, reporting, and so on and so forth. It seemed to me very difficult and then to say this specifically in this country that will happen. In the case of mitigation, this is not a problem. It doesn't matter where you will do it. This doesn't matter. Do it in Papua New Guinea, or do it in Wataguna in Mali, a remote area. On mitigation, that's not a problem. But we are dealing with a specific issue. To be sure, action undertaken in Ghana, there will not be a leakage in Amazonian forests, or there will not be, there will be a number of elements at the local level. And then want to have a wider, a bigger picture on what can be done, where that can be done, and how that can be done, how we guarantee that will contribute to the response of the climate issues. If no one is taking care to, if it's an afforestation project or reforestation project, and then no one will, if the permanence can be guaranteed, It could be because of the poor management. There will be bushfire. Everything will be swept up. It will be, or people will cut the trees. It will be, in the case of Ghana, as large part of the people, they are cooking with firewood and charcoal. And then they may cut the trees and then to produce charcoal and then to sell in urban area. You know, all those different aspects need to be considered carefully to see what, where, and how, and then at the global scale, and then so that you will avoid some of the problems we just indicated.
That's an enormous, complex challenge to do that. Extraordinary.
The problem is complex.
Yeah.
Climate is a complex issue. It's complicated, complex.
It's huge. Holly, did you have any reflections on that?
No, that was great.
Okay, so we're coming towards the end of our time. I just wondered if you, Youba and Holly, you have any last thoughts or reflections you'd like to share with us before we come to an end about the challenges that we face moving forward.
I think that climate is a challenge, is an issue, and unless we educate, we inform, we mobilize, any citizen will not be able to deal with the issue. And then to get a public participation, and then each of us, and then we are part of the problem, and then we are part of the solution. And that is very important. It's complex, it's complicated, it's not easy, but it's easy to get the situation we are actually, because we are emitting, not taking care to anything, but it's very difficult, very hard, and then to find adequate responses. And then we need to inform, we need to educate, we need to be to do it in a permanent basis, not in an ad hoc basis, like yesterday to have a big event on climate and then it's finished.
Thank you. And Holly, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I guess in terms of assessing whether these approaches are realistic or feasible at scale, I think it's hard to make those determinations because there's ways in which the paradigm can shift quite quickly for different things. So for example, today, Pakistan said that it won't build more further coal plants. And just thinking about the retreat from coal we've seen in the past couple of years, I mean, we might not have seen that as feasible 10 years ago, but we had this technological revolution of shale, which produced cheap gas, and that helped. And then we had kind of moral arguments around climate change, which also helped. And so there can be a combination of factors that can produce a different sense about what's feasible or likely. I don't want to put too much hope on that and not do the work, but you know, it's our role to keep campaigning. I mean, I'm speaking as a climate advocate here, not as an academic so much, you know, to keep arguing for a vision until it seems feasible. You know, it becomes contagious. It becomes the way of seeing the world in a sense. That's my last thought.
To keep the energy levels up. That's the thing. Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been fascinating. I've really enjoyed talking with you today. This is going to be available on our website, as I mentioned, with other materials. Looking into the future, tomorrow we have a webinar on direct air capture and carbon storage, if you're interested in that. And we've just put on our website a conversation with Johan Rockström about the planetary boundaries agenda as well, which you may wish to have a look at too. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much to Youba and Holly for your contributions. Thank you to Natalie in her absence, of course, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today, and I look forward to seeing you another time. So thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks. I look at Jan Rastam talk this morning. It was excellent. I look at the French version and then the English version, and the translation is excellent.
Excellent. Oh, that's good to know.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. And bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.